Did you watch it? I was on my way home and I got out of the car and I just heard shouting.
Oh my gosh,
it was astounding.
Yeah.
One
of the best games in some time.
One of the best games I've ever seen.
I can't get the spotlight for everyone and then get back into the gallery. Where the gallery is. Do you know what I mean? It's been tricky. Up there. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Life is good. Okay.
Are you seeing?
Okay, it looks like our online Sangha is popping back in. I'm messing with the focus. Sorry, instead of the Zoom. Here we go. So many new buttons. Thank you for all being here this morning. Let's see, I'm in the box, cut my head off. Okay, it was with great delight. So honored to introduce this morning's speaker, a VIP of mine. One of our new crop of meditation and mindfulness teachers, Dan Good, a student of Reverend Myogetsu's, a wonderful human. A little bit about his resume. He graduated from U of I with a bachelor and master's in combinatorial mathematics. Currently in his professional life, he's at combinatorial mathematics. You can ask him about it. That's all I know. He is a chief actuary of a large insurance company, part of the Society of Actuaries. Has two amazing children, a beautiful, fabulous life partner I couldn't be more happy to share this journey with. And this morning, he is speaking on the topic, There's No Pleasing the Dharma. Please welcome Dan.
Thank you all. Thank you, Kelly, for the wonderful introduction. I will say, maybe to your relief, there are very few numbers in this presentation. So, as an actuary, most of my presentations involve PowerPoint and numbers, so this is way outside of my typical realm of what I present on. Also, the first time I'm ever speaking in the Zen Center here, so excited to do it and excited to have you all here and listen. So my topic today is people pleasing and how it intersects with mindfulness and the types of things that we learned in the Foundations course. And I was debating a few topics, trying to make up my mind, and I really have to give credit to Kelly for coming up with the title of this. And once she came up with the title, There's No Pleasing the Dharma, I said, all right, I'm set. This is what I'm talking about. And so some of the reasons I think about people pleasing. And really, if you kind of flip it, it's really about authenticity and being authentic to yourself and to your values. But some of the reasons I think about it is I have a family history of people pleasing. I have family members that have these behaviors. I have these behaviors. I've got kids who are teenagers. when kids are teenagers, there's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of pressure to kind of divert away from who your authentic self is, what your values are. And so it's a topic that was of great interest to me, and so I kind of dove into it and tried to learn as much as I can and share it with everybody here today. And I actually thought it was quite fascinating, and I thought there was just so much intersection with the kinds of things that we talk about here in Zen Center, so I'll try to make as many connections. As I go through things, feel free to raise your hand, jump in, share, ask questions. This is kind of an informal dialogue. So I'll just start out with kind of defining what people-pleasing is defined as. And it's defined as chronically prioritizing others' needs, wants, and feelings at the expense of our own needs, wants, and feelings. And so I think the key component to this definition, it's not so much it is prioritizing other people's needs or meeting other people's needs so much as it is doing so when it is at the expense of yourself and your own needs. And so one of the things that kind of came up as I was learning about this and thinking about this is something that kind of came up over and over, which I really like, is that authentic kindness really always includes yourself. And there's no way where you're really being kind in a situation if your definition of kindness doesn't include yourself. And that's one of the things that as I go through life, I often don't notice that. I think, oh, I'm being kind to this person, I'm being kind to this person, and at the same time, I'm completely exhausting myself and wearing myself out. And so I think that definition of kind of expanding kindness to include yourself is really something that I think is helpful and useful to kind of come back to in many situations. So there's certainly a spectrum around this type of behavior. It becomes a problem when it becomes more chronic. Most people do it on occasion at the very least. And I Googled it and used ChatGPT to kind of get an estimate. I was just kind of curious. It said over 50% of the population really says that identifies as struggling with people pleasing at some point in their life. So it's, I think, a fairly common thing, provided ChatGPT came up with the right numbers. And this is one of the only numbers in the presentation. So what I found interesting as I was learning more about it is, you tend to think of people pleasing, it manifests in relationships with others, and you kind of have a tendency to think, well, you need to stand up for others and set boundaries, and all that is true. But it actually stems from an internal cause, which is a disconnected relationship with ourselves. And I found that interesting, and it is often looked at as a form of self-abandonment. And so it's generally considered a pattern of behavior that's often instilled from childhood experience. And the primary kind of driver behind the kind of motivation or mechanism for it is the need to feel safe. And we'll kind of talk about the different types of safety that you can get when enacting these behaviors. Another thing I thought was interesting about it is it's an ingrained way of interacting. And so what that means really is it's not a conscious choice. So when people are behaving in this way, they're not really consciously choosing to do that. And this is one of the reasons why I thought, the intersection with what we talk about here, being mindful, being aware, being embodied, really intersects nicely with this because it gives you an opportunity to take some space, take some pauses, and try to understand your behavior kind of as you're engaging in these types of behaviors. So, we can become more aware of these patterns, and then the feelings that drive and reinforce them we begin to work with them in new ways, and we begin to approach the situation with new insights. We can sit quietly with ourselves, restore connection to our authentic self, to our feelings, and to our values. One of the things we can also do is we can widen our window of tolerance to deal with the discomfort of these new patterns of interacting with others. So, once we kind of develop a mindful framework around becoming more aware and kind of restoring connection with ourselves, we're going to also have to work with our window of tolerance a little bit in when we deal with others, because when we deal with others, we're going to run into situations that are uncomfortable. We're going to have uncomfortable emotions before an interaction, during an interaction, after an interaction. And so, how do we work with these uncomfortable emotions and kind of widen our window of tolerance so we don't fall out of integration when we encounter these situations? So these are the types of things that I'm going to be talking about for the remainder of the talk. And I think, people pleasing can often be very subtle. And I appreciate the definition that I got when I researched it, but I tend to think of it as any behavior that occurs really when you're going against your authentic self. And so it's probably a little bit more general of a definition, but that's kind of how I frame it. And I think it can be very subtle and happen in very simple ways that you might not even recognize. And so one of the situations I'm in a lot, I have to do a lot of work functions, a lot of work dinners. And it typically involves a lot of drinking, and so there seems to be, kind of an unwritten rule that everybody has drinks before the dinner, during the dinner, that go out after the dinner. And oftentimes that really doesn't work well for me. It just, I've got 2 kids, and it just, it doesn't work well for my mental health. It doesn't work for my sleep the next day. And as I've noticed this over the years, especially as I've aged, too, it becomes less and less compatible with my life. But it's interesting because I find myself in these situations, and when everybody's ordering a drink at the first round, I feel very tempted to just order the exact same thing as everybody else. Do whatever the first 5 people ordered, and so I really have to interrupt that. And first of all, just kind of notice that I'm feeling this desire to kind of go along with what everyone else is doing. And then second, I kind of have to interrupt it and kind of challenge myself and say, do other people really care if I drink? Do other people really need me to drink just because they're drinking? And if other people are uncomfortable with my choice not to drink, is that really about me? Or does that really say something more interesting about themselves? Maybe they're giving me information about themselves. Maybe they have a complicated relationship with alcohol themselves. Maybe they're just curious to see what type of answers that I'll give so that they can use them in a future situation. So, we have to really be curious as to what others do. But I think for me, in those types of moments, one of the shifts I've kind of made internally was rather taking any commentary. It happens every time, almost every time without fail, someone will ask me something about why I'm not having a drink. And so, rather than viewing it as some type of a judgment on me or something about myself, or maybe I need to defend it, I kind of shifted that to say, oh, this is just kind of telling me something interesting about this particular person, why they're asking. And so then I just kind of give whatever answer I give. And I pay attention to answers that other people give too, because I kind of find it interesting. And one of my favorites was just a person that just said, I just like to live a very simple life. I drink hot water and tea, and that's it. I like to keep things real simple. And so these are the types of situations that you can find yourself in. And I think, interestingly enough, when I do choose, like a tonic water with lime or something, I do find it interesting that people after me, I feel, are more likely to then also do the same thing. And so you kind of create a new precedent. So I did it once, and then 2 people after me also just decided to order waters. And so I was kind of curious, had I not been the first to do it, would they have followed suit or not? And so, and it's one of these things too, where I think, kind of we'll get into this mindful aspect and presence of how you feel after you make the decision. And so, a lot of information, I think, can just be determined by how I feel when I drive home. So if I choose to have a drink or 2 drinks, driving home, I'm probably feeling kind of groggy. I'm not super alert. I might feel sleepy. And I might feel just disappointed in myself because I broke an internal boundary that I had with myself, that I didn't want to drink at this function. And on the flip side, if I am able to hold my internal boundary, then I tend to feel light and happy, and I'm alert, and I'm hydrated. And these are all good things for a person my age. In the next morning, it's a similar kind of thing. You wake up the next morning, and I feel good. I feel healthy. These are all indicators that I've made a healthy choice, something that aligns well with my authenticity. And so these are kind of good measures to use as you're kind of like, in these types of situations, and kind of how to motivate yourself to be able to make good choices for yourself. So there's many different origins to people pleasing. Some of them involve early trauma. often happens with addictions in families, can be the result of different parenting styles that you had, gender norms, cultures. All of these play an influence in the development of these patterns. And as I said earlier, the common thread in all of this is a form of safety. People are seeking some form of safety, and kind of three different types of safeties that we'll talk about. One is social safety, and that is the notion that I belong. So it's kind of a way of feeling you are belonging with those around you. There's emotional safety, and that is more like I am loved, that I matter. And then, of course, as a kid, there's material safety, that my basic needs will get met. And so these are the common threads when people develop these people-pleasing patterns. And I think it's important to make the distinction between what people-pleasing is and what kindness is. People-pleasing is generally considered something that is based on a fear mindset. It's actually, so we'll talk about it, it's actually a controlling behavior. And it comes, you can think about it in four different ways. It can be transactional. I'm giving you this so that you give something back. It can be an obligation. If I don't do this, I will feel guilty. It can be a compulsion. I'm doing this because I have no idea how not to do this. And it can be loss aversion. If I don't do this, I fear that I will lose you. In contrast, kindness is always based on love and compassion, and it always includes yourself. It's based on things like desire. I want to get this to you. Goodwill. I'm eager to increase your quality of life because I care. Choice. I don't have to do this. I want to do this. And then abundance. I'm giving you this because there's enough to go around. And we can use our mindfulness practice to determine whether we're acting out of kindness versus people-pleasing, often by observing how we feel emotionally afterwards. So, common ways people feel if they're engaged in people-pleasing is exhaustion, frustration, resentment. And Kelly can attest, I've been to many, many family parties, and I come home and I feel just exhausted. And I didn't know why. I just was like, I don't know what happened, but I am exhausted and I just feel like sleeping. And so, reading this, it was kind of interesting because it kind of points to this notion that probably some of the ways I were interacting were people-pleasing type of behaviors with different family members. Contrast to that, when you act out of kindness and out of these kind of other four ways we talked about, you tend to feel more happiness, goodwill, lightness, and connection with others. So, it's important to kind of take some inventory as to how you feel after your interactions to give you a better sense of your kind of motivation under your behaviors. That kind of add that I think it's important to notice your feelings without judging them. So we don't want to shoot the second arrow and make our suffering any worse. So be gentle. If you feel exhausted, and there are often times I feel exhausted, be gentle on yourself. Just observe how you feel and use it to create some resolve to try and do it differently the next time you're in a similar situation. So singular acts of people-pleasing typically don't cause any serious harm, but I found it interesting that people that have chronic people-pleasing behaviors actually can lead to more serious harm. The reason for this is that chronically prioritizing other people's needs over ours really gives you little time and energy to deal with yourself and your needs. So it has been shown to lead to outcomes such as anxiety, depression, stress, physical illness, heart disease, gastrointestinal issues, and autoimmune issues. It also prevents true intimacy with others. So true intimacy really lets us be seen for who we really are. When we're people-pleasing, we don't allow this natural connection to take place. And while it may reduce conflict in the long term, it generally creates more suffering, or I don't know if I said it may create conflict in the short term, it generally creates more suffering in the long term. And the short-term way that I like to think about this is, taking the easy way out in the current moment can often create dis-ease in the long term. And so that's kind of a helpful mnemonic way for me to kind of remember that in those types of situations. Or as another person told me once, if anything feels amazing immediately, it's probably not good for you. So, as I said, our first kind of step in kind of breaking this pattern of people pleasing is we don't really start with setting boundaries or making requests of others. It's really kind of an internal reflection. It's reconnecting with yourself. And in order to do that, we need to understand what our own needs are, what our values are, and we need to feel our own feelings. So I think everybody here and in this room, myself, we can all do a great job of avoiding our feelings, and we have more and more resources at our disposal to avoid our feelings with technology and everything else. There are zero boundaries at work these days. People can text, email at all hours of the day, and they certainly do that. We've got screens all around us. So, some of the ways people avoid their feelings is through drinking, compulsively pursuing success, productivity, and achievement, or constant consumption of screens, so TV, movies, cell phones, social media, all that can provide amazing, great distractions from having you actually feel your feelings. And I think, when you don't feel your feelings, you're really kind of storing that away in the body somewhere, and it kind of stores and it sits, and I think this is why it kind of can lead to these chronic health issues, with this kind of disconnected way of living. So one of the antidotes in terms of our practice here is our mindfulness meditation, because when we sit with ourselves in mindfulness, we allow ourselves to become aware of our feelings and our experience. We can notice what is it that we are afraid to feel. And in one way, as we kind of work through this practice, in becoming mindful of our feelings, is actually to just work with the body. So, interestingly enough, I thought, because I'm kind of in this camp, and I'm kind of shifting camps here as I age, but Western thought tends to discount the wisdom of embodied emotions, where the mind and body tend to be viewed as separate. The mind is considered perfect, the body is considered flawed, and we kind of control our unevolved bodies with our evolved mind. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because as a mathematician, I used to like to pride myself as to just how amazingly logical I was with every situation. And my mind was a perfect, theorem, corollary proof. There was nothing else there. And so, feelings didn't make a lot of sense, right? There was no logic there. And so what that leads to is intellectualization, which is something I've, been super, super guilty of most of my life, which is putting feelings and thoughts using reason, logic, and research, all to avoid the felt experience of an emotion. So, very interesting. So something probably all of us in this culture deal with, as it's very prevalent. And so what I also found interesting is there's a lot of research that actually demonstrates pretty clearly that not only our emotions experience with sensations in the body, but the way they are experienced is actually very similar across all people. So they've done studies of people experiencing different emotions and have asked them to identify, where are you feeling this? What are you feeling? And they catalog these things, and they discover people tend to feel these things in the exact same places in the body. And so you can use your body as a map if you're having difficulty understanding what your felt experience is, which is something I've struggled with, to kind of say, what am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? And, that can give you some clue as to, what emotions you're having. And so some of the things they've said is anxiety is usually experienced in the stomach and associated with very shallow breaths. Anger is tension in the chest, neck, and shoulders. Hopelessness feels like a prickling in your limbs. And happiness is generally experienced as a strong flood throughout the entire body. And then depression is experienced as a decrease in overall sensation. So in our mindfulness meditation, we give ourselves an opportunity to scan our bodies, to notice these sensations without judgment, and to attune to how we're actually feeling. It gives us space to better identify our needs and values. So in doing this, we can begin to reconnect with ourselves, undo our old patterns of thinking and feeling, and become more aware of our embodied emotions. Okay, so becoming connected with yourself is kind of really this crucial first step, and now we're going to talk a little bit about, after we have reconnected with ourselves, our emotions, and our values, how do we bring some new action into the way that we interact with others? And this is kind of more tied to, as I said earlier, kind of our widening our river of tolerance. And so in order to do that, there's really only one way to do that. It's not something you can do in your head. You actually just have to practice it. There's no other way. I've talked with other people, and if you don't do it, it's just, you're never going to build that muscle. So a lot of this is practice, and so then a lot of, the mindset of a practice is it's never going to be perfect. We're not striving for perfection. We're never going to be fully perfect in anything, but if we can practice a little bit, and I like to think, even moments where I am unsuccessful, but aware that I was unsuccessful is actually, it's helpful. I'll take it. It's better than being unsuccessful and being unaware of it. So one of the first ways I talk about is dealing with other people is making requests of others to get our needs met. And many people with people-pleasing behaviors have a tendency to think, I shouldn't have to ask, they should just know. I'm super guilty of this. You can ask Kelly. It's like, dude, you didn't say anything. I'm like, look, don't you just know? He's like, how would I just know? And so it's taken me a while to realize that people don't always just know how you're feeling. You have to make requests. So we kind of need to move away from this victim-minded sentiment and move towards agency. So when making requests, it's generally helpful to use what many people here are familiar with, the nonviolent communication framework. And for people that don't know what that is, a very quick overview of what it is, it tends to be a 4-step process, with the first step involving a fact, kind of an objective fact about something that happened that no one would disagree with. The second would be your feelings in response to what happened. The third step would be connecting those feelings to a need that you have. And then the fourth step is making a request of the other to meet that need. So here's just a simple example of a nonviolent communication style. It's, when you were on the phone last night, I felt sad because it prevented us from being present with each other. I need to feel more connected. Would you mind spending less time on the phone when we're together? Probably an example that resonates with almost everybody here, because how many times have we gone out to a dinner with friends or anything, and within the first 5 minutes everybody is looking at their phones, and then can leave the interaction feeling like, well, did we really get to connect? Was anyone present? And so you can make a request like this, and when you make a request like this is the kind of point where you have to relinquish control of how the other person is going to respond to the request. You can control making the request, can't control responding how another person responds to it. And so, talk through just 5 different ways these types of requests can play out and kind of how to deal with them, maybe what they mean. And the first one is really simple. Person agrees to meet the need and just does it. This would be kind of the ideal outcome. Grand slam, pick up your socks, socks get picked up and never left on the floor ever again. Everybody is in place. The second form is a receptiveness to the need. I understand you want the socks picked up, and I'll do it. But you notice occasionally the person needs a reminder. Hey, you've been doing a good job, but there's still socks on the floor. Can you please remember to pick them up? Yep, sorry. And so this is good too. I think this is the third is being receptive to the need, but kind of unwilling to use the strategy that was requested. And this just requires some collaboration. So in the example of the cell phone, you could think, the person could respond, I'm really busy. I need to monitor. I've got important work emails coming through. I really need to monitor phones. What are some other ways I can meet your need for connection? Can we do a dinner out before the night where the two of us spend an hour together and have a nice meal, no phones, and then when we get back home, I'm going to have to get back on the phone. And so you can, this step has some collaboration in terms of, making sure that this need is met. So the fourth and fifth are a little more tricky to deal with. So the fourth one is the person claims to be receptive but doesn't actually change or do anything about the action. Get back to this one. And then the fifth one is the person is not receptive at all to the request. Nope, I am unwilling to do that. And 4 and 5 are a little bit more challenging responses, and it might mean that we need to alter the relationship we're in. We might need to alter the structure, our expectations of the other, or the intimacy with that person involved. And so that can be, a challenging component of dealing with this kind of framework. And I'll talk a little bit more about, how this, how you can interact with these kinds of things. Number 4 can be especially problematic as it can lead to what's called the cycle of endless requests. Because the person was initially receptive but doesn't do it, it creates a lot of confusion for the person that made the request. And so the person that made the request gets into what they call an endless cycle of these requests, where they say the same thing and the person again exhibits a responsiveness to meet the need, doesn't do it, continues to go on. Ultimately what happens is it leads to a lot of resentment. And usually the person making the request tends to feel like a victim and can get pretty angry. And people can get stuck in this pattern for years and don't really regain agency until you radically accept that the person is not going to change their behavior. And I thought, kind of interestingly enough, or kind of ironically maybe, since we're talking about people pleasing, one of the things that person might be doing is people pleasing is, kind of giving you the answer that they think that you want, but not really authentically committing to that. And so, if you're not authentically committing to that, that's a very confusing situation for people. And, again, if you find yourself in a situation where you're making endless requests like this, you have to think about, what can you alter in terms of the structure of, again, the relationship itself, your expectations of this person, or the intimacy of this person. So in addition to making requests of others, we also need to work on setting boundaries. And there's 2 different types of boundaries that we can talk about. And in general, when we feel taken advantage of by others, it's a sign that we have crossed some of our own internal boundaries. And so I kind of talked about this in my desire to not drink. If I drink, I'm actually violating an internal boundary that I set for myself. And so we might want to blame others rather than taking responsibility for our own lives, but this is where it's important to kind of make that shift and take responsibility for ourselves and for our choices. And so for me, I find it helpful to just kind of create some clear internal boundaries before an interaction. So, I play tennis every week with my friends. We go out for pizza and some drinks afterward. It's kind of a normal thing. And before I go, I used to go and just kind of let whatever happened, and I could find myself too often not having a great outcome from the event. It wasn't, the great fun of connecting with my friends. It would actually, I would feel I'd stayed out too late, or I had an extra drink, and then I felt really, groggy and tired going to work the next day, and I had an important meeting or presentation. And so I've actually, think about my boundaries before I enter an interaction and say, well, am I going to eat pizza late at night tonight? Does that work for me tonight or not? No. Am I going to have a drink tonight, or am I not going to have a drink tonight? Does that work for me or not? And then what time do I need to be home so that I can get to bed when I need to get bed and function the next day? And I create all of these before I go out, so I'm really clear as I go into the interaction. Nope, I'm not going to go out for pizza afterward, or I'll go out for pizza and I'll have a glass of water, but I need to be home at 10 o'clock or my next day is going to be shot. And so just kind of having the foresight to do that is something that I found helpful. But as we said, one of the things when you start setting more internal boundaries is you're going to have to be willing to enforce them in your interactions with others, because people challenge boundaries, right? It's not just kids that challenge boundaries, adults challenge boundaries. And so, one of the things I said that can help reshape how you think of these interactions and how you can enforce boundaries is the first one is, again, when people are challenging something about yourself, I used to think of it as a more personal attack on myself or something I needed to defend. And ever since I've really shifted to saying, what information is the person giving about themselves? What can I learn about the other person from their questions? It's really diffused that part of me. And so I really feel like in those situations, especially with work dinners, I have zero problem doing it. I'm actually kind of curious to see what people say each time I say no. I'm just I wonder who's going to say something and what they're going to say, and then I wonder why they're going to say it. So rather than something that I was uncomfortable doing for a period of time, it's something that I'm super comfortable doing. I can feel almost 100% confident that I'm going to do it, and I'm actually just kind of curious to see what happens when it does it. So that's kind of one way you can navigate boundaries is don't make it about yourself, and don't attach any judgment on yourself when people challenge your boundaries. Another technique that is mentioned is called the broken record technique. And the broken record technique, as the name suggests, is basically just repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And while this can sound insensitive, you can empathize with others and say something like, I see that this is important to you, or I see that you're disappointed, but really ultimately it involves kind of saying the same thing. I don't have the energy to meet out with you tonight. I'm going to have to take a rain check. When the boundary gets challenged, you just come back to that same thing. I understand you really want to see me tonight. I don't have the energy to meet you tonight. I'm going to have to take a rain check. The boundary gets challenged again. You say, I see that you're very disappointed that I'm not going out, and I understand that, but again, I don't have the energy to go out. You don't have to create any new complicated statements. You can keep it very short and simple, and be kind to yourself and be kind to what you're needing in that moment.
We need a little mic closer, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Is this better online? Give it a 1, 2.
You have to start all over again.
From the beginning.
That was a request.
Fifth answer, which is
I understand, but no.
understand, but but yeah, it's important to notice that we don't have to alter our boundary. And we want to take care, too, not to demean others for what they choose to do or not to elevate ourselves, but it's really simply about staying steadfast to ourselves, to our needs, and to our values. Now, sometimes our boundaries are incompatible with meeting the other person's needs. And so this leads to a situation where it can become very tempting to people please to maintain the relationship, because you can get a sense that once I start imposing these boundaries, this person seems less interested in the engagement. And this is just a really good time to remind yourselves that relationships are only sustainable when your needs are also being met as well. And if you self-neglect yourself, those relationships are going to be unhealthy for you in the long run. So, sad or disappointing as it is, there's really no need to kind of alter your own boundaries in that situation. And again, it's a situation where you're in a relationship that may need to get altered. So in addition to internal boundaries, we also need to create some emotional boundaries with others. And so this is a separation between ourselves and other people's emotions. And people pleasers often have underdeveloped emotional boundaries, and we've learned to manage other people's emotions as a way to stay safe. And so what it looks like when you lack emotional boundaries is you feel responsible for solving another person's problems. And so here's where we have to distinguish, the difference between having compassion for others' suffering and discomfort versus feeling responsibility on yourself to help fix or solve other people's discomfort. And another good time to remind yourself that kindness always includes yourself. So being able to distinguish can involve checking in with yourself after the interaction. Again, if you're feeling overwhelmed or drained, you might be taking on too much emotional responsibility for others and not giving yourself the kindness that you need. People pleasers tend to believe they are responsible for making everyone in their life feel good. And in turn, this is what makes us worthy as people. And so, I myself am guilty of that. I have this notion that, everybody around me should always feel good in every interaction, and that's somehow tied to my worth or my skill as a person is making everybody happy. And that's one of those kind of false notions that I've been working with that, I have to release, because I just can't be responsible for other people's emotions and what they're going through. in our Zen tradition, we are reminded that we have value simply because we are human. And so trying to make everybody around you feel good is actually a form of control and attachment, and one that we really don't have any agency over anyways. So it's kind of think of it as a covert attack on our own self-worth. As I mentioned, these behaviors typically stem from childhood interactions. So we also must recognize impermanence, that our situations have changed. We might have developed all of these patterns and behaviors as children, as we were dependent children, but we're now adults with agency over our lives, and we have the autonomy to make our own healthy choices. Now, it's certainly okay to feel a little sad when a loved one is sad, to feel troubled by their struggles, and we could also feel moved to contribute in ways that are positive and compassionate. We can be happy to help others. But when we're feeling responsible to fix the situation, or we feel that our value is being able to fix the situation, or maybe we feel obligated to fix the situation, these are generally indications that this is coming from a control and fear-based mindset that will likely leave us feeling depleted and exhausted. So rather than providing solutions to a loved one's problems, one of the things that we can do, and one of the things that I'm working on, is just practice listening compassionately as they share their problems. One of the things that I've found time and time again is people often don't want your advice anyways. So they don't like your advice, they're not coming to you advice, they're really coming for compassion. They want to be heard, they want to be listened to, and they want compassion. So this desire to fix for other people is not even in line with probably what the other person is needing in the current moment. And so with respect to control, you can think about it as kind of being out of balance and spending too much energy trying to control others' actions and feelings, and too little energy taking responsibility for our own needs. We may be trying to control because of our attachments. We might be attached to a particular friendship or relationship. We could be attached to our status or to our reputation. We can be attached to how we're perceived. And we know in our Zen training that all of these attachments ultimately lead to suffering. And so I often tend to think of people-pleasing as also performative in this regard. You're kind of playing an actor in some kind of performance that has the ultimate goal of some type of acceptance or self-worth or maintaining some of your attachments. So when I notice that I'm feeling performative, it's a good sign for me that I need to slow down, need to create a little bit of space and try to reconnect with my authentic self and how I'm actually feeling in the moment. And when we talk about control, it's also helpful to be clear on what we actually can and can't control. So we do have agency when it comes to our actions, our reactions, our boundaries, who we enter relationships with, who we spend time with and how much time we spend with them, who we communicate with and how much we communicate with them, and which relationships we choose to stay in. However, what we don't have control over is other people's actions, other people's boundaries, other people's reactions to our boundaries, other people's emotions, other people's relationships, and other people's addictions or compulsions. We can certainly influence others by expressing our thoughts, opinions, and by making requests. However, we can ultimately not control how another person is going to respond to these. So while expressing ourselves is healthy and generally feels good, trying to control the outcome of that interaction is where you run into these feelings of exhaustion, depleting, and impossible. So we really have to learn to live within our sphere of control and accept that others' choices and behaviors are their own. And again, we don't need to interpret other people's choices as judgments on us, but rather just remain in a curious state, not knowing, and try to learn about what others teach us about themselves through their choices and through their behaviors. And the opposite of control here is to release some of these attachments and surrender. And there's a quote from the author Elizabeth Gilbert that I like. It says that we are afraid to surrender because we don't want to lose control, but we never had control, we just had anxiety. So when we release this control, we then give ourselves really the opportunity to show up with authentic presence. So we talked a little bit about the window of tolerance and kind of working with some new habits. And as we mentioned, as we break these old habits and begin new ones, we're certainly going to have to deal with a lot of uncomfortable emotions. And so, how do we widen our river so that we don't hit the hot or cold banks and fall out of integration? Because some of the emotions we will most certainly fear are going to be guilt, fear, grief, anger, and sadness. And we want to remind ourselves that we're going to give ourselves some permission and some latitude to feel some of that disease, because we know that if we don't feel that, it's going to create these longer term issues. So we really need to kind of stay focused on our longer term goals and needs, and not be as concerned with the short term implications in the moment and the uncomfortable feelings in the moment. Not be afraid to feel the feelings that we have in the moment. Some of the things you can think about is engaging in these behaviors are going to lead to healthier relationships, a better sense of self and belonging, stronger connections, more authenticity, and a greater sense of autonomy. So as you kind of reframe your thinking that way, it becomes a little bit easier to tolerate some of that discomfort in the current moment. And it is very much like building a new muscle. It will be challenging at first, and the only way to successfully do things is through repeated attempts. And each time, your self-advocacy will become easier and easier, and your window of tolerance for these challenging situations and emotions will increase. And this is a big change from running away from our feelings or escaping our feelings. And one of the ways we can work with the challenging feelings when they arise is, again, simply to pause and notice them. Name them. Name the sensation that arises in your body and where it's located in your body. I think the power of naming and feeling your emotions is actually quite powerful. And, though I used to think it kind of increased the power of the emotions, but I've actually found it actually decreases the power of that emotion over you. And once I name, experience it, and truly allow it to flow through me, it tends to also go away much quicker as well. I think I remember reading that emotions only stay with you for 90 seconds unless you continuously re-trigger them. So it kind of gives you an opportunity to say, can I handle these 90 seconds of discomfort? And, can I just sit and experience this feeling and name it and sit with it and allow myself to move on afterward? You can also just be gentle to yourself. Tell yourself that it's okay, that you are safe, and that you are loved. Just be with it as it is without judging it and without changing it. You could also say things like, guilt is a normal reaction I need to have when standing up for myself right now, and I accept that. Remind yourself that every no is a yes to something else. So when I went out to drinks, or when I went out to dinner with my coworkers, when I said no to drinks with my coworkers, I actually said yes to being able to get home early and help my kids study. They both had math finals the next day. And for me, that is more important to me. That is something I value. I mean, I always kind of had the dream of being that kind of father. And, I love math, and it's my passion of mine. And when my kids had help, I wanted to be there for them. And I love those moments. And so when I say no to those things, I give myself new opportunities to say yes to things that really are things that kind of enrich my life and give my life meaning and purpose. Another thing to think about too is that there are all the benefits to other people. You're not just benefiting yourself. So, when you start to shape some of these new behaviors, it actually becomes easier for other people to meet your needs once they know what they are. They will no longer have to guess or be confused, as they will know you better. And in some cases, they can learn to become more independent without your help. It also just gives them an opportunity to really develop an authentic, honest, and sustainable relationship with you. Okay, and so the last thing is really talking about a difficult topic that comes up with people pleasing is outgrowing relationships. So as you grow in this practice, some of your relationships will certainly shift. So this will happen because you'll be setting new boundaries that will feel different to you, but they will also feel different to the other people in your relationships. You'll be using nonviolent communication to make requests of others to meet your needs. And some of the time, people simply choose not to respond to your requests, and this is something we have to accept. I think a good reminder is that the healthy relationships you're in will adapt to your new behaviors, and they will appreciate your clarity. Unhealthy ones may resist, guilt you, or withdraw. And so we can let that reaction be our compass as we navigate which relationships we want to continue to invest in and which relationships may not be healthy for us. And when you become and show up more authentically, you will start to attract people that really value the real you and not the version of you that pleases them. And this can be a difficult process. But we are not intended to be mirrors for other people. We are actually our own people. We have our own unique ideas, beliefs, values, and priorities, goals, dreams, and visions. So we can appreciate others for who they are while being free to show up as ourselves. We can remember that we also can belong while appreciating that we can be different. And remember, there is no we without me. Kindness without truth becomes manipulation, and authentic kindness always honors both you and the other. True compassion always includes yourself. So if you choose to reset your balance as it relates to these behaviors, as you take inventory of some of your people-pleasing behaviors, remember that the freedom is in practice, not perfection. It's not going to happen overnight, and if you catch yourself in the old habit, come back gently to yourself. Breathe and begin again. The patience is the practice. So people-pleasing, as we talked about, it's about managing others' perceptions, trying to control how you're seen, whereas mindful presence is really being fully here without agenda. Listen openly rather than trying to be liked. Notice when you have an impulse to adjust yourself and just choose stillness instead. So we can drop the performative self, trusting life as it is. The Dharma is already perfect, and there is no pleasing the Dharma. So, thank you all for your time and attention. I'd like to open it up for any questions, comments, dialogue.
Yeah, there's about 10 minutes left over here. I would just like to start out by first saying thank you for that lovely talk. I know you've been working very hard on it. You have a lot to share. And it's so lovely to see you in your authentic self. I don't even think I'm biased when I say this. I think your authentic self is just perfect. So, and I think that's a real teaching for all of us. I know we can be scared to be who we really are and say that thing that we want to say, but I think we see it in one another. It's the gift of the Sangha, isn't it? That you just see one another, how perfect they are in their own Buddha nature. So thank you. That was really lovely. I think I have Gary here.
Yes, I'll echo the thank you. Well, first, thanks for exposing all of my flaws and freeing We've talked a little bit after Dharma talks about your work and corporate life, etc. Does the tendency to want to please in your personal life extend to your corporate life? And just an example would be is you're given an assignment to research something, come back and report to your boss. And going into it, you kind of know what your boss wants out of this, but maybe the numbers don't come out quite that way. Do you ever feel like, oh, maybe I'll massage these?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think that certainly comes up. And so within the actuarial practice, we're involved a lot of estimates of the future, and the future is unknown. So there is a lot of variability in the future. And you do get pressure to see the future a little bit differently. And so we do have to, we have actuarial principles that we kind of rely on that is helpful in those situations to say, we have to sign in and test these things, and our credentials are at stake every time we sign an opinion. And so that gives us a little bit of help in terms of dealing with those situations and kind of falling back on our actuarial practice. But I will say, when you deal in work situations, the reason I like the question is I think there's way more fear for me involved in corporate settings, because when I think of my corporate life, that is like the mechanism upon which I provide for my family. That provides everything, our food, our housing, and I am scared. I am more scared in a corporate setting about losing those resources. And so it is, I think, for me, more challenging to show up authentically in that space because it feels like there's something at stake. And Diane and I had a conversation about this, and she pointed to, well, this kind of ties into right livelihood, and I agree with that. If I'm unable to show up as my authentic self, is this right livelihood? And so I would say it's something I'm certainly working towards, but I do find it a little bit more challenging in that space.
Over here, Mark. And then those online, feel free to unmute yourself.
Oh, Dan, wonderful. First a comment. My name, my Zen name is, Shishin. And Shin is mind, heart. And I really appreciated your sort of approaching that in there, in your talk. I wonder whether, if I talk about the three sins, greed, hate, and delusion, if you sort of thought about them and reinterpreting them in your talk.
I didn't, but yeah, that's a good question, and certainly, when you're in the people-pleasing kind of mentality, you have a lot of that, right? Greed, anger,
Hate,
yep.
delusion.
And so I think it is, a good framework to kind of draw through that narrative in terms of how people-pleasing kind of, interacts with that.
I wasn't expecting you to please me in that answer.
Any next? Okay.
Oh, thank you, Dan. That was absolutely lovely. And I love the way that, as you talked about not knowing, I really appreciate the way that you talked about being curious about the comments and the situation and the other, because I think it's a bit unrealistic to expect that you go into this not knowing mind and that you can cut off all thoughts and ideas and judgments. And I like the word curious, and you said it a number of times, and it really impacted me in terms of, yes, we can have that open-mindedness that's not filtering everything through a judgment lens,
Yep.
and that we're just being curious in terms of the other and the interaction. So thank you. Lovely.
Thank you.
Ellen?
Wow, so I'm going to speak personally, you just shed a huge light on my childhood. As a middle child, I perfected pleasing others, totally. I was so good at it, and to the point where I thought that's who I was.
Yeah.
And I thought that was my genius, being able to please others. And so I began to carry that forward in my life, and I hadn't thought about how it was to protect myself, because I was scared that if I was truly me, I wouldn't be loved or accepted. And I was just telling Gary yesterday, I didn't feel fully loved or appreciated by my family. And what I see now, it's because I never truly shared who I was with them. And now that I'm older and I do share that, and it's still maybe not who they are or what they necessarily respect, they've learned to love and appreciate me for that. And if I hadn't given them that opportunity, if I hadn't stepped into that, what a different life it would be. So thank you. I never saw that before. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's wonderful.
Anyone else online? We still have maybe 3-4 minutes. Oh, yeah. Here. Diane?
Thank you. It was really great. I was following along in terms of how this works, and I'm so excited to revisit it. And I like the part where you said, then the relationships will change. And I think it's a perfect topic because some of us are going home to see our families and all. And then I'm going, that's still going to be my relative. And so it didn't change that part, but I'll go beyond that. But you're thinking, oh, this is perfect. I can try this. And they're still going to be, where they are, Yeah.
I agree. Perfect timing, perfect opportunity to kind of think through it as we deal with some of these relationships with others in larger settings for the holidays.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Over here? Yeah, Martina.
Hi, nice to see you. Thank you for your talk. I just have this curiosity question because I heard your curiosity about how the other people react when you say no, and kind of finding out that information of like what does it say about them. But I wonder on the flip side, since you are exploring this topic, have you noticed how are your own reactions to when people tell you no, being, or recovering from people pleasing, and how do you work with that?
So when other people say no?
Yes.
To my requests?
If you're willing to share.
I think that's great. I think, that's one of the things too. I think that's a great question. I'm thinking about it now for the first time. But I think as a people pleaser, you expect other people to behave the same way you do, which is saying yes to everything and going along with things. So then it is, I think, you don't notice it probably, but you are more challenged when other people say no. And so I think the benefit is I think being able to hear other people's no and being able to relate to it in a way of saying, no, they're setting a boundary that's about their own personal space, and I do this too now, and so I think it gives a little bit more flexibility, which I think is very helpful for connection.
Anyone else? We're right about time here. We got Genshin. Is that Scott?
Hey, Dan. Hey, everybody. Dan, that was just so lovely. My takeaway is that when I say no, it opens up a yes in my life. And that was just such a great invitation for just so much more abundance. So thanks so much for that point right there.
Okay.
Dan, thanks for your talk. And thanks for all the great examples you gave.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, with that, that's a wrap.
All right.
With that, we can continue the conversation in the community room. Erica brought some great fresh bread and snacks for us to enjoy. Those of you online, have a lovely Sunday. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.